Welcome back to episode 59 of the Jumping Through Hoops podcast with myself, Hannah Charlotte. And today I am interviewing Tom Howard, who is someone I actually haven't met in person yet, but who I've met through a mutual friend. And we are waiting to meet, aren't we, at some point, because you are a photographer and you used to be a celebrity photographer, and you've got a really interesting story to share. So I'm going to introduce you now, Tom. So say hi to everybody.
Hello everyone. Good evening.
Hello.
Thank you for that mini introduction. I still am a celebrity photographer. It's just the phone doesn't ring.
Brilliant. So let's hear all about you and your backstory of how you actually got into photography in the first place. I know you've just been discussing with me before we started recording this that you've been a photographer for over 30 years. So let's hear about it.
Well, my father was a TV director producer, and aged 10 or 11, he gave me his Nikon F camera with a 50mm prime lens on it, which had been his family holiday camera. It's a great big weighty clunky thing, and I was fascinated by it, and I started taking pictures. And I had a darkroom that I'd set up in the downstairs bathroom at the family home, and the first time I saw a print emerge in a tray of developer under the red lights of a darkroom light, I was transfixed by that, and that sat with me for a long time. And I went down the path of studying hard and doing O-levels, as they were called back then, and A-levels. And then I found myself starting a degree in architecture, but it wasn't a fit for me because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was more about pleasing the parents and family around me, saying, what are you going to do with your life? So I fell back to photography when I gave up architecture.
Okay, well, interesting. So basically you're saying you kind of were inspired a little bit by your father then to get into it. That's quite interesting. I never knew that. So
yeah, although his medium was television and this was stills, and there's a big crossover, but there are a lot of differences between them. But in my time, I've directed pop promos off the back of the celebrity music photography I was doing. So I sort of played with both mediums, and they are very different to me. And I'm actually returning to moving image, as we'll maybe discuss later.
Wow, that's quite interesting. As I say, I didn't know that's how you kind of got into photography, I guess. Yeah. So it's really interesting. So then you actually started doing it as a job. You decided you weren't going to carry on with studying what you were doing, architecture, and you decided to take up photography as a career.
So I after I flunked out of doing a degree in architecture and went to lowly art college to do an HND in photography, I then arrived in London with a portfolio of, at the time I was really into black and white infrared photography, which was very, very gritty, grainy stuff. And I had some quite thoughtful portraits of people and touted them around record companies, magazines, and had a lot of interest. And I remember Morrissey's label saying, oh, Morrissey would love this, in the way that people talk about these things that never happen. And that never happened. And I then had to be humble and work in a photographic studio. And come up through the ranks of T-boy to messenger to kit organizer to meeting people and assisting photographers, which I did a lot of.
Yeah.
And coming up through the ranks in that manner. And then in the 90s, I find myself on a first-class Virgin Atlantic flight to Hong Kong, or was it Tokyo, to photograph the Spice Girls releasing Wannabe.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So you really did have to kind of work to get to that stage of being, obviously, I guess, did you hold that vision the whole time? Did you know that that's what you wanted to do when you started off, assisting other photographers? Did you know that that was the route you really wanted to go down?
What, into photographing celebrities?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not at all.
No?
Not at all. I think I was definitely interested in pointing a camera at people. I very quickly, when I was assisting photographers, learned that still life was a still death, and it was not me. So it was very definitely people oriented. But I started reading Vanity Fair and looking at Annie Leibovitz's work, and I'd studied the history of photography and had, I was fans of people like Bailey and Bresson and all of these photographers, but I never had an end goal. I fell into pop photography, the celebrity photography, and did it for a long time. And I think even at the time, I didn't really appreciate how lucky I was, because there was always an emptiness, an empty hole that wasn't being filled by what I was doing. And I've been plagued with periods of depression throughout my life, and I was the proverbial duck, all calm on the surface and paddling like fury underneath, thinking that I was just getting away with it, that what's the syndrome?
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Really full of the amount of lack of any self-confidence. So I became an expert at wearing a mask, and the mask was a sort of cheeky, in-your-face, irreverent person, because I've always hated having my picture taken. I've felt incredibly self-conscious. So when I point a camera at someone, I assume that they're going to feel like that. So my job is to make them feel at ease in some way. And if that, and that has I've sort of played different games with it, but it's to do with self-deprecation, being outrageous. My friends say I've got Tom's Tourette's. I am consciously making every effort to swear much less than I have done in the past, because I'm beginning to learn that what you put out comes back to get you.
Yeah. So let's go back and talk a little bit briefly about that world that you were kind of immersed in with celebrities, the lifestyle, and I guess how you then transitioned out of that world into, obviously, I know you're still a photographer, but you've gone down a completely different route now.
I still photograph people.
Yeah.
A lot. They're not celebrities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not demeaning celebrities. In a way, I would get phone calls saying, are you available to photograph so and so? I would not know who they were more of the time than not. And then the duck would start paddling, and then I'd look on the internet and go, oh, they're this person. And if I actually admired them, then my anxiety levels would go up a notch or two. But on the whole, I profess to not being interested in celebrity itself. It's always been the person behind the celebrity, because I think I've worn a mask and I know what I'm like behind that mask. And it's what is the honesty and the truth behind these things. And the photographs that I'm doing now, and we'll get to, I have been living out of a mobile home on the road, and it's amazing how you meet people. And I've been documenting that and photographing real people, and they're intimate pictures that I feel are some of my better work in recent years, because there's a freedom to it that isn't linked to earning money or anything commercial.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about how you then, how did you transition from those two, because they're very contrasting worlds, aren't they? So, you know, being a celebrity photographer in London, traveling the world, to then being like you've become quite a spiritual nomad, I guess. Like, you're traveling around and as you said, you know, photographing still, but in a completely different context. So let's talk about
and not earning any money for it. We're talking about entrepreneurialism. That's coming. That's on the horizon.
But when did that actually happen, that transition period? Can you pinpoint a time, and was there an impacting moment in your life that caused that transition?
It's a multi-step thing, but pure sloth and lack of self-confidence and being full of self-loathing. It was literally falling from one situation to another. And so I was never good at self-promotion. There was always the self-effacing, make an idiot of myself, or there was this thing that wasn't me. There was a disconnect from someone who I felt that I was, and that ended up with, well, I think the celebrity thing I have contemporaries who are still doing it, and I cope with feelings of jealousy or envy about their longevity, but I also accept where I am on my journey. And it's like it wasn't long term, it wasn't a sustainable thing. And lo and behold, the last couple of years with COVID, my sort of backbone of earning a living was based very much on event photography, and COVID hit and it was tumbleweed, and pretty much has been since then. I wasn't happy doing it anyway for decreasing fees and increasing workloads, unsociable hours of day and night. And that ended up being all that I was doing, because celebrity photography had left me behind, or I'd left it behind, and there are all these unanswered questions. And it's all part of life's journey, and you add a failed marriage to the mix, and I had a rock bottom, and it was time to start looking in
Yeah.
and that was, well, I've been dealing with it all my life, but certainly my marriage falling apart was a very definite turning point, because I brought children into the world and had these responsibilities, and it's a big deal. And the guilt and shame that you carry for all these things. So everything was exacerbated. I fell apart, and you go down all the routes of antidepressants and therapy and this and that. I've always been more left field and anti-establishment and looking for things that are outside the box, which is with the blessing of my young nephew, how I ended up going to Peru and going to an ayahuasca retreat for a month.
Yeah, so this is something I really wanted to talk to you about, because I've actually been looking into ayahuasca ceremonies for a long time. I've not actually ever been to one. I've never tried ayahuasca, but I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I follow a lot of spiritual teachers, entrepreneurs that have actually done an ayahuasca ceremony, and they have said how it's been quite life-changing. So can you talk a little bit about that then, and tell us about your experience with it?
Where to begin? Oh my goodness. I think until what I've been doing now in the recent months or the last year or so, that experience in Peru was the hardest thing that I've done. And it's about cleansing, and it's about purging, and it's a spiritual. I knew that I've always been an agnostic, or my parents have interesting religious backgrounds. I've never felt religious, but I've definitely felt the calling of something spiritual, but never taken the time to look at it properly. And going to Peru was that opportunity. And I did it for a month. You'd do ceremonies 2 nights running that would start at 9 p.m. and Papa Emilio was my shaman. And you're in the jungle, and you've got the noise of the jungle around you, and it's very sacred. It's a serious business. And so you sit quietly in a roundhouse or Maloka with all the jungle noises, and you're given the ayahuasca, which is difficult not to regurgitate immediately because it tastes so bitter and disgusting.
So just in case people don't know what ayahuasca is and what we're talking about here, it's plant medicine, isn't it? It comes from
it's plant medicine, which has been used by the Shipibo tribes people of Peru and other countries in South America for thousands of years. And it's a combination of the ayahuasca vine, which is a vine that grows up trees, and a shikuna leaf. And how those tribes people discovered the mixing of those two, they describe it that it's a teaching medicine, but their lives are very intricately involved with the jungle and their environment, which is where the Western world has lost its footing. So it's sacred, and so ayahuasca is a combination of those 2 leaves that are cooked up in a cauldron over a fire for 12 hours by an ayahuasquero, and he teaches his son how to do it. And they crack down, they pummel the vine leaves, brew this mixture, and it's contains DMT, which is a hallucinogenic. So it's illegal in this country as yet, although there seem to be a lot of research going into psilocybin and addiction and depression. And my going there was like I was going to hospital. I didn't go to Machu Picchu. I just went to this ayahuasca retreat pretty much, and was there. And Papa Emilio you would sit in ceremony and you'd drink the medicine and have trouble keeping it down, and you'd sit, and then it would take hold. And Papa Emilio would also have taken the medicine, as would other people in the Maloka, and he'd start singing Icarias, which are songs, but everyone is different. And the belief that they have is Papa Emilio's jungle spirit is a Black Panther, and the Icarias, he is just a conduit that Mother Ayahuasca and the universe and the jungle brings these things. And those Icarias, they sit and sing in front of you and spit perfume over you, and it's ceremonial, and it promotes purging, and you spend the night throwing up and shitting yourself and sitting in contemplation.
It sounds terrible.
Like I say,
really appealing.
It was one of the hardest things I've done.
Yeah, I have heard that it's horrendous to go through, but I know so many people I've spoken to that have gone through it have had life-changing experiences from it.
So what it is they see it as a teaching medicine. So it's like having a mirror put up in front of you, and you see yourself for who you are for the first time properly. And that's quite painful to look at.
So can you talk a little bit about what any of your experiences with it? What did you see?
Well, the hard work started after I returned to my life, and I fell apart after I came back. That was 4.5 years ago now, I think. And I've basically been slowly rebuilding myself, but I sort of understood that my house that I'd built from, my childhood and those experiences, the house that I built was crooked. There were things that were not right about it, which is why I'd gone through my life feeling incomplete. And so my Peru experience was a very definite turning point to starting to look inside properly. And so coming back to my life afterwards has been hard in part, but it's been definitely a personal development journey, and I've fallen by the wayside, but in the last year things have changed quite drastically for me, born out of difficult circumstances and my photographic career grinding to a halt, and various experiences with human interconnection that you feel let down by, and there's it's personal stuff, but a lot of things built up to the point where it seems, along with the COVID story and everything, I thought, to hell with it, I'm going to rent my flat out, which I own, and buy a mobile home and go into nature. And that's what I did. And that has been that was when you and I first met during that. And that has been revelatory in terms of I was caught up in the rat race, in the paying the bills, in the, oh my God, in fear. And it took a while, but I'd say a couple of weeks to where my brain and my body and my spirit kind of went, oh, a massive sigh. And since then, I've been learning a huge amount and reading a lot and studying, doing a lot of personal work. And the take homes of it are very definitely, for me, are that my brain, my spirit, you can only listen to your spirit from a place of calm and tranquility. So I hadn't listened to my spirit, although it was screaming at me in the form of depression, but you spend your life running away from these things you fear most. And, in having the courage to turn around and stop and take stock and reevaluate has been the most valuable thing to me. And I've learned a huge amount about myself and where I've been going wrong. And I'm well beneath the summit of that mountain, but the trajectory is positive rather than flatlining, or indeed based on life actions taken through fear. And one thing that I've learned is that I think way too many of us, without even realizing it, are driven by fear.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one. I think it's the reason behind a lot of people not following their true calling and their true purpose in life is fear. We're all prisoners of fear, and to a certain extent. So would you say, when you went and did this ayahuasca ceremony and spent time in Peru, would you say that was like your first sort of catalyst of obviously you had a spiritual awakening from what you're describing? It's a huge spiritual awakening where you start to listen to yourself. And I guess this is where, is that the point where you sort of changed the trajectory of, the photography as well? Because I know if you want to talk a little bit about how you've also gone down the poetry route and you're starting to write more as well now.
And there's been no I wish I could lay claim to having forged my path. It has been one of tripping and stumbling from one stroke of luck to the next, as it were, because I've lived my life full of fear and not known who I am. I still don't know who I am, but I know who I am a lot more than I did a year ago. And where I am now, I feel excited potential. So this whole idea of the world is really messed up at the moment now, politically, and our capitalist culture, and we could go down that route, where we really, the most valuable thing one can do as a member of humanity to better humanity is to work on yourself. That's it, bottom line. And it's been very valuable lessons learning the art of not getting caught up in my narrative around things that happen to me, and beginning to take the stance of the impassive observer of what's happening around you. And then rather than living your life from a reactionary place of resentment, anger at the world, you can choose your battles. You can choose what you're going to get emotionally involved with, because that takes energy, and there's only so much energy that we've got. So why not put your energy into positive things?
Yeah.
And those sort of, it's like telling people how to suck eggs, but it's not, because it's like it's so basic that we miss it.
Yeah.
A lot of my poems, so I've written all my life. I'm a very left-handed person, which is quite an interesting philosophical thing to talk about. And I've started doing van interviews in my van with interesting people about these sort of things. And that might become something, a YouTube channel of the van interviews. And it's really my quest, given the journey that I'm on in myself, which seems to be searching for truth and honesty. So these interviews that I'm engaging people in, although the topics that we are talking about are very diverse, the common thread is honesty and truth. And there's one other word that sums those two up, and it's love. If you're willing to be vulnerable and admit that. It's not a big taboo, love, is it? It's after all Valentine's Day.
Yeah, we have quite a few conversations about this, actually, don't we? About it self-love is
everything.
Yeah.
And I am the expert. I've spent years sitting, staring out a window, smoking a fag, and wishing myself not here, and loathing the ground I walk on and the air that I breathe. And it's no way to exist. And but I've had to go back and figure out where that's come from. And you can only do that from a real calm place. And I've been doing lots of reading of very interesting people, and I'm now understanding that privileged and without poverty, I had a very happy upbringing, but it wasn't without its traumas. And there's a psychologist I've been reading a lot of, Dr. Gabor Mate, who talks about this subject, and I've found it deeply valuable to read his work. And he works with addiction, but it's all about the neural pathways that we are formed in our very early childhood experiences, which are linked to our parents' background and their parents' background. And there's always trauma linked to that, but it's the great unspoken of in so many families. And that is where I've started to understand where my empty place came from. And in understanding it, then I can get a step closer to the answer to the cure for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say, like, generational coding, which we carry through, through our DNA as well, don't we? Through
there are elements of all of these
grandparents, great-grandparents,
and a lot of it is completely subconscious.
Yeah. So I call this shadow work.
Okay.
I got quite heavily involved with working, as I call, on my shadow last year, with a girl called Danielle Massey. She's known as the Shadow Queen. So it what you're talking about there, it kind of resonates quite a lot with me, with work I've been doing on my shadow. And I think everyone carries this shadow, which, as you said, in the subconscious, it's,
but without the shadow you can't see the light, so
no.
you've got to embrace it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk about a little bit obviously you're saying you've been inspired with your writing as well, and your poetry, and talk about the author. You were just talking about Gabor Mate just now. How his teachings have inspired you.
Well, he's a very clever man and has taken time to, he's obviously a specialist in his field. He's a psychologist and he's highly intelligent, but he is a deeply compassionate and thoughtful man, and his take on addiction, and he worked on Skid Row in Vancouver for over a decade and saw all sorts of atrocious things. And it's his take on addiction is the addicts that he was dealing with are at the cutting edge. They're the smackheads, the crackheads. But humanity is addicted. We're all addicted to whatever it is that distracts us from our worst fears, which is why most of us spend our lives living in fear, running away from something, which is why I work with a therapist who is invaluable and has written a book called 12 Steps to One Hero. His name is David Hurst, and you should tag him on this. And it's a 12-step program, much like the Alcoholics Anonymous program, but you can put any label that you want, other than you can include alcohol, and I have, because I have a relationship with it, but you can include depression, sex, food, shopping, running, the gym. We all have these things that to distract us from what we need to be looking at. And this is the spiritual path. It's so when depression hits, it's your spirit saying there's something that needs looking at. And I spent my life running away from that something, and it's taken me quite a long time to actually have the courage to stop and turn around and look at it and start learning. And that is what that is the most valuable thing you can do for humanity. It's about being, and the word selfish was a very bad word in my book growing up, and I still believe it is. There are a lot of very selfish people in the world, but in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of spirituality, the most important thing you can do is turn in and examine yourself, so that you can have a benchmark from which you understand the world that's operating around you. And in understanding yourself, you then understand how other people work, and then you can have more acceptance of, and therefore you have an easier ride, and what you put out grows. And that's where love comes into it. So
and it's, like you said, like a ripple effect. And going back to what you're saying, it really resonates with, I truly believe if we don't work on ourselves, as you say, we carry it on through generations and generations, and there the world won't change. So yeah, sorry.
No, well, it's the most valid point, because our children are the future of our humanity. And let's face it, our biggest drive is to procreate. That's why we like sex so much. But the drive behind that is for our children. And look at how the system that we live in, the capitalist culture and the politics, how much money is going into education. Education seems to be costing the earth. When I went to university, it didn't cost a bean. That's because I was old and things were very different back then. But we're born into this world now that dictates that you've got to study hard, go and get a job, get married, have 2.2 children, pay your taxes, and then die, and we'll take another load of money off you. And that is the opposite of the spiritual path.
Yeah.
And it's thank goodness I've woken up to that fact before I've popped my clogs, because and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm lucky and privileged to be in a situation where I can do that. But I am, for the time being, a nomad living on a home that's on wheels. But my goodness, I can choose where I can go and which bit of nature I'm going to sit in.
And that's freedom, isn't it?
It's real freedom. It's real freedom. And like I said, I hadn't done it for years. And I woke, in fact, the very first night that I set off on this hero's journey from London in this 30-year-old, £10,000 mobile home that wallows down the motorway at 55 miles an hour. And I arrived in Dorset and saw the sea and started crying. And then I got on the Swanage ferry, and they call my sort of mobile home a land yacht. And I used to own a boat. I love sailing. And my boat was called Aquavit, but its original name was Cucamoula, which I always was going to change the name. But in boat ownership, it involved filling in forms, which I was never good at. But I could sit on the chain ferry going abroad to Swanage in my land yacht. And there I sat and named my land yacht Cucamoula. And Cucamoula is where I am on my spiritual journey. It's very tied in with my spiritual journey, because it takes me to places, to wherever I want to go and sit and contemplate. And the biggest take-home bit of advice I could give is that you will only find yourself by stopping. And you can only look at yourself and make rational decisions from a place of calm. And it took, like I said, it took a couple of weeks of me being in nature for the pressure cooker to go shh. And then the insights start coming.
Yeah.
And I need to go and do more of that, so I can be a more valuable member of society and figure out what I'm doing.
But you have been, well, let's talk a little bit about your poetry, because you have been writing as well as your photography. You have been writing, haven't you? You've been
I've
writing.
also been thinking about, I feel arrogantly like I've got a book in me until I read some books by authors where I go, oh my goodness, I should just, throw my pen and pencil away. But I feel, I don't know, I feel like I've got maybe something to share about my spiritual journey. But I've been writing a lot of poetry about these sort of things, but about lots of things, about about love, about failed love, family. I find sometimes, you know, I've written poems in anger after a phone call with a member of my family, and it's cathartic in some way. And I write, you know, I write some silly stuff, but I write what I'm thinking, and I hope that people who read them, it maybe makes them think. It's about thinking. It's about that introspection. And so while I'm on my journey, asking myself questions, it somehow maybe helps me make sense of it by writing poetry, and then it helps my ego being validated by thousands of people on my Instagram account. It still doesn't make any money, but I might publish a book of poetry and go buy it.
Yeah. So where can people, because I guess when it warms up, you're going to get back on the road and go back and do some of your van interviews. Are you know, where can people sort of follow your happenings, your journey?
People, if they're interested, can follow my wonky happenings, and I'm very proud of a hashtag that I feel I created. I think I created, called Celebrate the Wonky, and so my van interviews, I've done 7 or 8, but they're on ice waiting for me to learn which platform or how to make it all work. But I think that's going to be a YouTube channel, maybe an umbrella of the brand Celebrate the Wonky. Yeah. But currently, if you want to look at what I'm sort of doing, although that it's all, you know, there's no rhyme or reason to it, it's poems, it's portraits from when I was on the road, it's old stuff, it's new stuff, but you can find me on Instagram at Tom Howe, TOMHOW.
And I will tag in the show notes of this podcast episode. I will tag your Instagram account and where people can follow you.
Great. And I'm if anyone was so bored that they actually watch all of this and have any questions, feel free to get in touch and ask me questions, which I'll answer to the best of my ability.
Oh, it's been good. It's been great episode. I think people will find this really quite interesting, especially, you know, those that are on a similar journey, that are going through a spiritual awakening right now, or perhaps have been considering trying the ayahuasca ceremony.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
You know, there's a lot to this, and we could probably go on and on and on and talk. In fact, we'll have to do another episode at another point talking about more of this.
But I was trying to think of how to conclude, as far as my life experience goes, and it's getting you to try and look at things. Often things are 180 degrees out of kilter, and I'm going to quote Sartre saying, "Life begins on the far side of despair." So the worse the shit you're in, you need to realize that is the source of the very most beautiful silver lining, and don't run away from it. It takes courage. It really does.
Yeah, some really wise words, and this for me has actually been really, you know, it's given me a lot to think about, actually, just talking to you about this. And I think, as I say, we could go on and talk about so many things. But yeah, really wise words.
But another thing that I was thinking was, crikey, you know, my background in celebrity photography, you know, if the phone rang asking me to do a portrait of Steven Spielberg, I would shit myself, my French. I would, and I'd be my mind would be full of all sorts of doubts, and the duck would come out and the paddles would start going like fury. And then learning what I've learned, I'd not get engrossed in that. And it is only hypothetical because the phone is not going to ring, ask me to photograph him. But if it did, I know I would take, given what I've learned about myself, give him 10 minutes with me or an afternoon. And it wouldn't be it wouldn't be lit with £1,000 worth of lighting and assistants running around. It would be me, the sun, a reflector, and him, and it would be a great portrait. And when I photograph people now, one of my things is to ask them to give me nothing. But you have to wait for that moment of silence. And those portraits are the most powerful ones that I take, because they give you nothing.
Deep. Yeah.
Well, I've just given away my whole USP. I have to think of the next thing.
Oh no, it's been great, and we're going to wrap it up now, but I think we'll definitely have to do another episode at some point. So thank you so much, Tom, and as I say, I will make sure that I will share all your links in the show notes so people know where they can come and follow all of your happenings. So thank you so much.
Well, no, it's a real pleasure, and it's the first podcast I've ever done, so there we go. Thanks for putting up with me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, bless you.